Hi, this is Christopher, and I wanted to take a moment to stop and record kind of a testimonial here at my new beautiful studio that I bought earlier this summer. And a lot of you have been following me on Facebook and are aware of some of the trials and tribulations I've been through in the last about 18 months. And, kind of crazy stuff. I'm not saying that it's the worst thing that could ever happen to somebody, but it's been a really difficult year. I could sum it up by saying it involves girls, guns, and God, among many other things. So if you want to just sit back and listen, I'm going to tell you this is kind of my faith journey and my recovery journey. I've been an alcoholic probably for my whole life, but I've been in denial about it up until this year. And I'm going to tell you, starting back from about June of last year, how I got to this phase of my life that I'm at today. It all started, I had moved up to Washington, D.C. about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. I'd met this girl, a woman on a cruise, and we fell in love and did the long distance thing for a little while. And then I ended up moving up to D.C. area to be with her. And the plan was then to, come back to Florida after her son graduated from high school. Long story short, I was up there for about a year. I was miserable. I just didn't like it. I lived in D.C. as a younger man, but it's changed a lot, and it just wasn't my thing. Didn't really make any friends, and then had issues with the girl, and so I ended up coming back to Tampa at the about middle of June or 1st of July of last year. I had rented out my house that I own in South Tampa to some guys that had a 1-year lease that I actually just re-signed to extend them to 2025 in the summertime. So when I got here, I had to find a place to live. I lived in a couple of Airbnbs until I found a permanent place, or what I thought was going to be a permanent place, on Clearwater Beach on the water. And I lived in that for about all of 3 months, and then the hurricane came, and my place was on the first floor, and I got flooded. So I was back in a couple more Airbnbs, and then found a place that a friend of mine owned in Ybor. I'll call it Ybor Shitty. I lived in Ybor for about 3 months as well. And during that time, actually on the night before Christmas of last year, a guy was trying to break into my house, and I pulled a gun on him. That was kind of a crazy thing. And I'm 54 years old. I've never pulled a gun on anyone before. And thankfully, it didn't escalate anything, and I just kind of ran him off. A couple days later, my tenants called me and said, hey, we found a place that we'd like to move into, and we can move into it 1st of January if you want to get back in your house. And I said, absolutely. So I moved back into my house in January, and that was the 6th time that I moved, counting all the Airbnbs that I'd been in, and I was moving around with the dog, big dog. You've seen Bingo here on my Facebook channel and on some of the videos, but dog and 2 cats. Don't have the cats anymore, thankfully, but anyhow, it was kind of a crazy, last year, 2024. I came down with bladder cancer, was getting treated for that, had a couple of surgeries. I'm all clear now. The prognosis is good, and just have to keep getting checkups and that kind of thing. My dad also was dying. He had been in hospice care for about 1.5 years, and he died in February of this year. And what else? I started dating a gal. I started dating this woman and, fell in love. We had a great time when we were together. But there was just one little thing that kind of bothered me about our relationship, and that was that she was the kind of person that would say she was going to do something and then she wouldn't do it. And I broke up with her about 5 times the first 2 or 3 months that we were dating. And it just, nothing ever changed, and it really bothered me that we would make plans to do something on the weekend, and then Friday at 5 o'clock she'd change her mind and leave me high and dry, so to speak. So it was kind of this tumultuous off and on relationship with this gal. And May came around, and my kids graduated from college, or not from college, excuse me. My 2 youngest girls, the twins, graduated from high school. They went to Plant. And I had to get a friend of mine on the school board to get me a ticket to go see the girls' graduation, because it was not on good speaking terms with them or their mom. As many of you know who've been following me, I've been very open about that, and the difficulty of having 3 beautiful daughters that lived close by that didn't want to see their dad. So then June happened. June 2nd was my birthday, and again, situation with the kids, not seeing them. It's my birthday, not getting a birthday card or even a text message, hello, happy birthday kind of thing. I got depressed. I had been depressed for quite a few months, and between the girls and the girl, I started drinking a lot more than I normally did. And on a normal day, I drank a lot. A bottle and a half, 2 bottles of wine. That was kind of my drink of preference. And June, I started drinking even more, maybe 3, sometimes 3.5 bottles of wine a night, and was still going through this tumultuous on and off again thing with the girl, and drinking more. And we broke up again, and I decided, well, you know, maybe the best thing to do to get over the last one is to move on and find somebody else. I know that's probably not the right thing to do, but that's what I did. So I got on the dating apps and I met this gal. Her name, incidentally, is Chris also, so try not to be confusing in referring to her and thinking that it's me, but her name is Chris also. And one night, I'd been on the phone with the ex-girlfriend for about an hour and a half, around 5 o'clock at night, and talked to her for, like I said, about an hour and a half, till about 6:30. Around 7, I called Chris. The phone call with the ex-girlfriend didn't go well, and I thought, well, I'll call Chris, see what she's doing. So I called her, and the next thing I know, it was about 8 o'clock the next morning, and I woke up, and I did not remember going to bed. I had blacked out. And this was not something new. It had happened to me many times before where I drink so much, you know, I'm functioning, but the next morning I don't remember, you know, the last 3 hours of being awake. So I wake up and I look at my phone and I think, oh gosh, you know, what did I do? Because my MO would be drink a lot, get on the phone, start calling people. Because I'm in this big house, 4-bedroom house that I bought for my girls to be in with me when they're around, and that wasn't the case. And I'm lonely and I'm alone. I don't like to be alone and I'm bored. So I drink to mask all the problems and then start calling people to kind of fill the loneliness gap. And I called Chris. And as I said, I didn't remember. I just looked at my phone and I saw that I had called her at 7 o'clock and talked to her for 3.5 hours. And I didn't remember anything. I had a Ring camera in my house in the living room, and I thought, well, maybe I was sitting in the living room when I called her. And so I looked up on the Ring and I watched the last 5 minutes of that phone conversation because I was in front of the camera, and I was mortified with my behavior. I was slurring and really having a hard time putting 2 sentences together and drawing blanks and just having moments of silence where I just couldn't remember, you know, keep my train of thought. It was embarrassing. So I texted Chris and I said to her, hey, we had plans to go to lunch that day. And I said, hey, are we still on for lunch at noon? A couple hours later, she texted me back and she said, my appointment in Tampa got postponed and I'm not going to come to Tampa now. So no, I can't meet you for lunch. Why don't you go to a meeting? And it was interesting because when she said, why don't you go to a meeting? I knew exactly what she was talking about. Even though I didn't remember the conversation the night before, I knew what she was talking about. And incidentally, about 3 weeks prior to this, I'd gone to a meeting. A friend of mine, Ho, his name's Ho, I'd called him. He's been a recovering alcoholic for a long time. And I called him and said, hey, I think I got a problem. I'd like to go to a meeting. And he said, hey, I can come pick you up and have you at a meeting in 15 minutes. And I said, well, you know, I'm kind of drunk right now. And he said, it's all right. You can go to a meeting drunk. And he said, I'll come pick you up. So I went. Long story short, I didn't go back. So fast forward a few weeks, and then I had this incident with Chris on the phone, and she says to me, why don't you go to a meeting? I say, yeah, I should do that. So I went to a meeting and talked to her about 3 hours later and told her that I'd gone to a meeting, and she said, well, that's good. And she said, do you remember telling me last night that you thought you had a drinking problem? And I said, no. And she said, well, you did. And you said that you thought that you should go to a meeting and start doing the 12 steps and that kind of thing. And I said, okay. And she said, do you remember what else you said to me last night? And I said, no, I don't remember. I don't barely even remember calling you. So she said, well, you talked for about 45 of the 3.5 hours that we talked. For 45 minutes, you kept talking to me and telling me how you don't like my fake eyelashes and how no man ever looked at a woman with fake eyelashes and thought, wow, I'm really attracted to her. Now, I'm 54 years old and I know better. I actually agree with that, but it's not the kind of thing that you should say to someone. Certainly not a woman whom you are courting for a relationship. So she tells me that I said this, and I was in my bedroom on the phone with her when she told me, and I literally wanted to crawl under my bed, or if there had been a rock underneath the proverbial rock. I was so embarrassed. I was mortified. And after I got through apologizing to her profusely, I asked her, I said, Chris, why when I said that, did you not tell me to go fuck myself and hang up the phone? And she said, well, I can tell you there are 3 reasons. She said, we'd gone on 2 dates and spent about 10 hours together in the previous week or so. She says, well, we've been out on a couple dates. I've spent a little bit of time with you, not a lot, but enough to see that there's something good in you. And she said, the second thing is, I am also an alcoholic. I've been a recovering alcoholic for 15 years, which she'd actually told me on the first date. And she says, I understand. And she said, when I was drinking, I have said and done far worse things than what you said to me last night. And lastly, she said, and I'm a Christian, and I can forgive you. And I was just overwhelmed. I couldn't believe that, after I had basically insulted this nice woman that I was interested in dating, that she would still have something to do with me. And this was not the first time that, I've been on the phone drunk saying stupid things. That night, I drank almost 4 bottles of wine, to give you an idea of how drunk I was, and saying those stupid things. It was a miracle that I was able to get back to bed in my blacked out state. But nonetheless, so Chris says those things to me, and I am just amazed at her kindness and consideration. And, she was very supportive of me going to meetings and entering into the 12-step program. So I'm going to meetings pretty much every day, and Chris and I are talking almost every day. And she approaches the subject of our dating, and she tells me, she says, Chris, I'm not rejecting you. I think you're a great guy. She says, but having been through the program myself, I know that it's not recommended that you get into a relationship when you're just entering the program, not to start a new relationship. If you have an existing relationship, it's okay, obviously, but they say you shouldn't enter a new relationship when you're working the 12-step program, at least for a year. So she said, I don't want to be the reason for your downfall. I'm so familiar with the program, and I agree with that principle that you shouldn't date someone, start a new relationship when you're entering the 12-step program. So it's not going to be me. So let's just be friends. And I said, okay, that's cool, that's fair. And she also said, God is an important part of the 12-step program, accepting a higher power. And I said, yeah, I know. And she said, well, would you like to go to church with me sometime? And I said, well, it's kind of funny that you asked me that. I said, I've actually thought about going back to church in the last, couple of months, but I just never wanted to go alone. So I always made an excuse, not to go. Or maybe that was my excuse. But I said, yeah, I'd like to go to church with you. So she says, all right, well, come meet me on Sunday at, 9:15. And she tells me also beforehand, she says, during the church service, at the end of the sermon, she said the congregation does a prayer in unison that everyone speaks out loud and inviting Jesus into your heart. And then she says, after that prayer, the preacher, the minister will say, raise your hand if that's the first time that you've said that prayer. And then after that, they do an altar call. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's, basically being invited up to the front of the congregation, where a church elder or deacon or what have you will say a prayer for you and inviting Jesus into your life, that you accept Jesus into your heart. And so she's telling me all this before we go to church, just so that I'm familiar with, kind of what's going to happen. And she says, if you want to go up and do the altar call and accept Jesus into your heart, and you don't want to go alone, I'll go with you. And when she said that to me, I said, okay, thanks, Chris, I appreciate it. And I'm thinking to myself, and for those of you who know me, I grew up, I went to church when I was a kid, mostly out of, kind of, I think, for show. My parents, my dad was involved in politics and whatnot. So, we went to church. We said a blessing over dinner, but, there was no real spirituality in my house. And the same thing kind of was the same with when I was raising my kids. We went to church, we took them to Sunday school, they participated in youth group and that kind of thing. We said a brief prayer before meals most days, but there was not a lot of spirituality in my house with my kids either. So those of you who know me and know my background and my religiosity, if you will, it was kind of non-existent. It was more really for show. And if you had said to me, if you want to go up and accept Jesus into your heart in front of the congregation, I would have said, you're freaking crazy. Like, that's just not going to happen, right? So fast forward, we get to Sunday. We go to church, and the sermon that day, the minister gave a parable about Jesus. And without getting into all the details of the sermon, the bottom line was, God wants you to get all the bad things in your life out of your life, things that are slowing you down, holding you back, causing you to do wrong and ill will and that type of thing. God wants you to get those things out of your life so that you can be a better servant of God and have Jesus in your heart. And when he got through saying the sermon, I turned to Chris and I looked at her and I said, "Did you tell him I was coming?" And she just looked at me and kind of smiled. She said, "No, I didn't tell him you were coming." So they then do the prayer, the group prayer, accepting Jesus into your heart. He says, "Raise your hand if that's the first time you've ever said that prayer." I raised my hand. I felt like I was the only person in the whole church that raised their hand. This is a church that probably seats 2,000 people. It probably had about 600 that day. I told Chris later I felt like I was the only person. She said, You weren't the only person." So he says, "Raise your hand." I raised my hand. And then he says, "If you would like to come forward and accept Jesus into your heart and be born again, do so now." And I turned to Chris and I didn't even have to say anything. She knew. And I wanted to go up there and participate in the altar call. And again, I would say, like, if you had told me that I was going to be participating and doing this the day before, I would have said, "You're fucking crazy." But I did it. I went up there and it was Chris and myself and this church elder, and we all held hands, and he started saying this prayer over me. And I began to weep. And I can tell you, in my life as an adult man, I cried in public maybe 5 times. And it's always been at a funeral, and I'm always, trying to wipe away the tears, got to be Mr. Macho and not cry and be seen crying in public. I started to weep, and I did not care. I had this feeling, this sensation come over my body that I get goosebumps just telling you about it right now. It was like nothing I've ever felt in my life. The best way I can describe it is as if all the bad blood in my body just drained from my head down to my shoulders, to my torso, down to my elbows and arms, and down into my knees, into my feet, and just drained, and then were immediately replenished with good blood. It was an exhilarating feeling. It was greater than any high that I've ever had in my life from doing alcohol, right? And I was overcome with joy and peace and exhilaration. It was like nothing, no roller coaster or exciting thing that I've ever done before. This was a pinnacle moment. It was just absolutely unbelievable. It was almost like an out-of-body experience. And as I sit here and I tell you this story and describe it, again, I would say, if you had told me that this was going to happen the day before that it happened, I would have said, "You're fucking crazy." But it happened, and it was real. And I still, I'm amazed, and I get it now. I get it when people say that they have a relationship with God, that they feel God, that God works for them. I've been praying every single night. I get down on my knees and pray. I used to never pray, or I would pray when I wanted something, right? Maybe I wanted a new car, or, maybe it was something a little bit more genuine, like, my grandma was sick and I prayed for grandma's health to improve. But it was very rare, few and far between prayers, and I was never down on my knees praying. I do it every night now. I ask God for my continued sobriety. At present day, I'm at about, I think, 79 days. I ask God for my continued sobriety, and I pray for other people. I pray for my children. I pray for their mother. I pray for my other family members. I pray for my friends. I pray for the people that are in the 12-step program with me. I don't pray for myself other than just to ask for continued sobriety. But one night, I said a prayer on a Saturday night, and I was still having back and forth issues with this woman that I was dating. And it was very tumultuous in terms of, I just never knew where I stood with her, right? Are we on? Are we off? Is she good for me? Is there any reason for continued hope? And so I said a prayer that night, and I asked God to show me a sign as to whether or not I should continue to have hope and to try to rekindle this relationship with this woman. I didn't ask him to get us back together. I just said, "Will you give me a sign?" So the next morning I went to church, and I went with a friend, Jane, and I was telling her about my prayer the night before, what I had said. She knew the whole story about, this woman, and how kind of toxic and tumultuous the relationship had been. And I told her that I prayed to God for a sign. So about 5 minutes until the service was over, my phone beeps, and it's a text message, and I look down at it, and it's from the girl, and she says in a text message, "Why do you have to quit drinking now? Can't you put it off for a few months?" And I was just like, what the fuck? I turned and I showed it to Jane, and her eyes got real wide, and she looks at me and she leans forward and she says, "There's your sign, Chris." And boy howdy was it. God gave me a sign. And I had to call her afterwards. My friend Jane said, "Don't call her," but I called her afterwards in the car. And I said, "What was that all about? That text message you said?" She said, "Well, I woke up this morning, I kind of missed you, and I thought it would be fun if we would go to brunch together today and we could drink mimosas." Clearly, this is not a person that has my interest at heart if she only wants to see me if I'm drinking with her. Long story short, it took a long time for me to get over her, but I did. It took another couple of weeks. Despite that sign from God, it still took a couple more weeks for me to truly just like get over her and to no longer think about her, and to recognize that as lovely as a person as she is, in her heart, she's not good for me. And so I was able to move on. I also began to pray for a rekindling of my relationship with my children. And every night I was praying for that. Some of my girls I have not spoken to in years, and it's very painful, has been very painful. Well, after I started AA, after my 30-day period of sobriety, I posted on Facebook that I had quit drinking, and I shared that for a number of reasons. One, to include hoping that we reduce the stigmatism of alcoholism, and that we recognize a lot of people are struggling with this problem, and that it's not something that we as a society should look down upon. We should extend a hand and show support for people who have a drinking problem and encourage them to stop drinking, and to be supportive of them when they do quit drinking. So I shared it for that reason, and also I wanted just to be known that I was doing that kind of for my own accountability, that everybody knows Chris isn't drinking. So if I go out on a Friday or Saturday night and I'm sitting in a restaurant, you're not going to see me with a drink in my hand. And that was part of the reason for my sharing that on Facebook. But it turned out there was a really amazing result of that. And that is a couple weeks ago, I started getting text messages from my daughters, the twins, who were getting ready to go off to college, and they wanted their college savings money. And so we were exchanging texts back and forth, kind of more on a transactional basis, but it was good communication nonetheless. And with one of my daughters, Mia, that actually transcended into a more important or a more personal exchange of some emails. And one thing led to another, and we made plans to get together and go see each other about a week and a half ago. And we met for about 4 hours. We sat here in this studio and talked for an hour and a half, and both of us cried a little bit, and shared and talked, and she told me things that had bothered her that I had done, and I apologized and asked for her forgiveness, and assured her that while I can't change the future, I can assure her that I'm going to be a better person, that I am a better person than I was moving forward. And we met again a few days later, and she told me that one of her sisters had texted her and said, "Well, what made you want to get back with Dad and have a relationship with Dad again?" And Mia said, "Well, I just did." And when Mia told me this, we were having dinner at my house the night that she was recounting this exchange with her sister, and I said, "Well, Mia, why did you decide to reach out to me and want to have a relationship with me again?" And she said to me, "Dad, I saw your Facebook post that you quit drinking and that you're getting sober." And I have mixed feelings about, I got a little goosebumps just saying that again now. I wish I had done it sooner. And I didn't realize until that moment, and upon further reflection afterwards, that my drinking, as much as I didn't think it really had an impact and an effect on my children, I know that it did now. and probably to a bigger extent than I had understood it to do so. And I will continue working with my girls, praying to God that I get the relationship back that I want with the other two, and working with Mia and talking with her. She's a fantastic kid, and so are my other girls. And I can just say my testimonial here today, had I not quit drinking and had I not accepted God and Jesus back into my heart, this transformative moment that I've experienced in the last two and a half months would not have occurred, and I am sure that my daughter would not be back to me, and I would still be drinking and still feel hopeless and hapless and helpless and full of self-pity and depression, and seeking fulfillment from others, in particular, in relationships with women, to fill the hole, the void that was in my heart. And I no longer feel that need. I just kind of had an epiphany moment just a few days ago where I don't really feel like I need to have a relationship with a woman right now to fulfill myself. I sit at home alone a lot still like I used to, and I'm totally sober, and I feel better. I'm getting more things done. I'm eating better. I'm feeling healthier. I'm sleeping better. And I have one of my daughters back in my life, and I'm hopeful that I will get the other two sometime soon, but I'm willing to also be patient with that. So I close with this long story that I shared with you. I'm a believer. I am a proud believer. I wear a cross necklace on my neck now, and I'm not out there trying to convert people or anything like that, but I'll tell you what, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus Christ, and my life wouldn't be in the great place that I'm at today compared to where I was just 2.5, 3 months ago if it weren't for the sake of God. I appreciate you listening. I welcome any comments that any of you have. If you want to share with me, either call me or send me an email or text or what have you. I'm not sure what exactly formats we're going to post this video, but you can share there as well. And I just want to say thank you to all my friends and people out there that have been supportive of me in this effort, quitting drinking and finding God and reestablishing a relationship with at least one of my daughters right now. The support has been phenomenal, and I can't thank each and every one of you, but I thank you all generally, that the support certainly meant a lot to me. And God bless. Thank you.